Enrichment, Enlightenment, Transformation. Rabbi Yisroel Cutler, the spiritual leader of Chabad of Cary, North Carolina, guides anyone who has been searching for a meaningful life and conscious living. Join our discussions about the mundane, our daily activities, and then infuse every day with a spiritual twist from the inspired sages of the Talmud and Jewish mysticism, which many call Kabbalah. We learn from the root source of all religious monotheistic traditions and delve into the symbolism and levels of meaning from biblical stories.
Good morning. I hope we have, good morning to everyone here in Cary, joining in at Chabad of Cary, as well as anyone who is tuning in from the Carolinas or anywhere across the world on the live stream. If you are tuning in, please let us know. Please ask questions. Please let us know that you are part of the program. It means a lot to us, and a special thanks to Nissan Communications for making that possible. So good to see everyone here. Everyone having a good day? But even if you were not, that also is okay. Because today's class, I'll entitle it, What Do You Do When You're Feeling Bitter? That's part one. Or maybe that's part two, because my other point is, we will address, how do you know when the problem lies with you? And how do you know when the problem lies with someone else? People that are honest with themselves can ask themselves that question. You see yourself getting upset, you see yourself getting angry. What are the sorts of questions you ask yourself to determine whether it's you or whether it's the other person? Anyone? Again, every case is different, but what generalizations, what general questions can you ask yourself are a good way to make that determination? Or are we gonna
I just always say, is this me? Is it just me? Or is this person really?
So that's my question. How do you know? Meaning there are times when someone is rightfully doing something wrong and bothers you for a reason. How do you know? How can you differentiate between the two?
I asked somebody else.
Okay.
What do you think?
Get an objective opinion because you are subjective. I like that. No one else?
As a husband, I get up and say, I'm sorry.
I don't know what for, but I'm sorry.
Well, you can use yourself as a judge and say, if I was doing whatever to that person, would it be right or wrong? So am I right or wrong that being upset by what they're doing to me?
So try to step out of your shoes for a moment into the place of the other person as best you can, which is similar to what you said, except you can do it yourself.
Or both.
Good?
Or both.
For both. What else? What other ways of determining?
Is it even something worth getting angry about?
Okay, that's...
Have you taken it internal, the anger, as opposed to, that's who they are.
Well,
Why am I bringing it into myself?
Well, but in the situation, though, you can still react to the situation without being angry.
Correct.
If the person is doing something inappropriate, you can you can give them feedback.
That's
different than being angry.
Right, but that alone, we're going to touch on that later on. Sometimes if you are able to do that,
Right.
that actually is a good sign that, it's more the other person. We'll get there in a moment. So we're going to begin, though, with the first question. What do you do when you're feeling, and I won't say angry, I'll say bitter. That'll be the word that we'll use a lot today, bitter, because that is the Torah's word. How do you say bitter in Hebrew?
Something like that.
Well, the holiday's coming up in a few months. The bitter herbs are... So charoset is the sweet nuts and the apples.
Oh. The bitters on the bitters.
So that will strike one, but no.
It's part of the Seder.
So it's its neighbor.
I went to the right.
Maror. Maror, or mar in Hebrew, means bitter. So we're going to talk a lot about bitter, actually a place that's called Mar or Mara. This is actually from last week's Torah portion, but this week is also part of this, because this week the Jews get the Torah. The Jews receive the Torah in this week's Torah portion. I want to see if that's someone Come in here. Come on in, welcome. So the Jewish people get the Torah in this week's portion. And what that means does not mean that they get the Chumash, the 5 books of Moses, as we know it today. Why does it not mean that?
Well, for them, it had future components.
Correct. That the stories didn't happen yet. Okay. The 5 books of Moses, and this is a little parenthetical, that are events that happened over the 40 years the Jews traveled in the wilderness, and only upon Moshe's passing was that completed and given to them. Okay. So what did they get when they received the Torah? We know the 10 Commandments. They got the biggies, and they committed to the entire Torah, even though they didn't yet hear it. It's like signing the document before you read all the fine print. But that is exactly what happened, and we make a big deal of the fact that the Jews did that. So they got a sample, they got the 10 Commandments, but they agreed to getting the entire Torah. Now, that's in this week's Torah portion. Did the Jews as a nation...
Did they get the first couple of books before the Exodus?
Those were traditions that they might have had, spiritual traditions, passed parents to children, but not in its book form. Probably not. Good discussion when that's for another class, maybe before Shavuot. Did the Jewish people receive any teachings of Torah before they got the Torah? Okay, before they actually got the Torah in this week's Torah portion, were they instructed on any of Torah or mitzvot?
Yes.
Upon their departure from Egypt, they were told about a few mitzvot, such as the Paschal Lamb, about the Jewish calendar, about not eating, about Passover.
Mhm.
But that's about it.
What
Anything
about
else?
worshiping that cow?
That's afterwards.
That's after?
That's after they got the Torah, and that's
So,
Yeah.
had they already been instructed not to worship idols?
not in the Torah.
Because if they hadn't gotten that instruction, then the whole incident at Sinai with the golden calf is harder to see why that was a problem.
Oh, no. The golden calf was after the 10 Commandments. And
Oh,
number
okay,
2 was,
okay,
thou
okay,
shalt
okay,
not
okay.
have any other gods other than me. There's nothing vague about that at all.
Wait,
So the
I-
golden calf was after the 10 Commandments. What I'm asking is between Exodus,
Wait, but Moses was still up on the mountain.
Moshe
Okay.
went up the mountain the morning after they got the 10 Commandments. They get the 10 Commandments, then Moshe goes up to the mountain.
Okay.
During those 40 days, they do
Right.
the sin of the golden calf.
All right.
So yes, they knew not to have idols by that time.
Okay.
What I'm asking is at this point in the story, prior to the giving of the Torah, which mitzvot do they get? And we said about Passover. Anything else? Well, last week's
The
Torah
Noahide
portion,
was.
okay. Last week's Torah portion had a little bit. Let's do this story that's not discussed much.
Well, the Noahide laws applied, but were they informed of them? You know, if they didn't have,
The
if
Torah
they didn't
yet,
have the
Torah
story,
yet.
with
But
Noah
I
and
would
everything
think
else.
all of society would.
As spiritual traditions, perhaps. Good question also.
Okay.
I'm going to pass on that just for now. Let's start with this story in last week's Torah portion, right after the sea split. You know, most people close the books at that point. All right, the drama is over. There's a little story after the splitting of the sea that we don't discuss as much. Why don't you begin, Bill? Verse
Which side we
22,
on?
the story of Marah. Everyone see where we are?
Mhm.
I have another copy here. Why don't you begin?
Moses led Israel away from the Red Sea, and they went out to the desert of Shur. They walked for 3 days in the desert, but did not find water. They came to Marah, but they could not drink the water from Marah because it was bitter. Therefore it was named Marah.
So we don't know when it got the name Marah. Presumably, it was only called Marah because the water was bitter, and Marah in Hebrew means bitter. So what happens? Well, and why don't you fast forward much later to where it says how the water was sweetened? So he cried out to the Lord. You see much later on the page?
Yes.
I'm just
Yeah,
going to
so-
fast
so-
forward. I want to
so-
finish the story,
Okay,
yeah.
So he cried out to the Lord, and the Lord instructed him concerning a piece of wood, which he cast into the water, and the water became sweet. There he gave them a statute and an ordinance, and there he tested them.
End of story, then we move on to the next piece. Kind of puzzling episode.
What
So
was the
3 things
statute?
happen.
Yeah.
They travel 3 days, don't have water. Act 1. They come to Marah and the water is very bitter. Act 2. Act 3 is Moshe takes the Hebrew is actually eitz. Eitz is a tree, but I don't think it means he took a put a tree inside, it means he took a branch, he took a staff, a piece of wood, and he throws it into the water, and that is when it becomes sweet.
Is that considered a miracle?
Correct. This is pretty miraculous. Throw wood into water. Wood into bitter water becomes sweet, so this miracle happens. All right, so those are the three pieces here.
Perhaps that will happen.
What?
Perhaps that will happen in the Midwest.
There's some bitter water.
Yes.
So, in Flint, Michigan. There we go. That's the problem. They didn't try throwing the piece of wood inside. They should have tried that. This is the story. So, all right, another miraculous story in the Talmud, in the Bible, where the water is bitter. Let's go a little bit deeper on this story, and that's what we're going to do today. First of all, the Midrash tells us that their timing was actually quite lousy, because the Midrash, which is an oral tradition, why don't you read, Janice? Rabbi Yeshua said,
okay.
the waters were only bitter at that, see that, yeah.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry, where?
Up here, Rabbi.
Yeah, I'm all over the
Yeshua
place
said-
here.
Oh, okay, no problem. Thank you. The waters were only bitter at the moment and were sweetened again.
So it used to be good water. Just before they came, it became bitter. And Moshe then pulled off this little shtick by throwing in the piece of wood, and it became good, sweet water again. That is the story. Where's this story relevant in Jewish law? That's the story. Is this a story people talk about much? Biblical story? No, it's not. You never heard of it. Okay. People closed the book after the splitting of the sea, as far as last week's Torah portion goes. This actually has a lot of relevance in Jewish law, because I'm actually going to paraphrase this long piece from the Talmud, because there's a lot we have to get to today. The Talmud says that one of the institutions the Jews had when they came to Israel for the second temple, there was a fellow whose name was Ezra, and he brought the Jews from Persia back to Israel. And at that point, a lot of rabbinic Judaism began, and Ezra instituted that they should read from the Torah, not just on Shabbat, but also traditionally Mondays and Thursdays were always the days that we traditionally read the Torah in synagogue. So he said, Monday, Thursday, Shabbat, those are the 3 times you read it. Then the Talmud says, was that really something new that Ezra did? Didn't we have another tradition that it was much earlier that Moses instituted it? And what is the scriptural proof for it? Everyone see where I am in the Talmud? And he went 3 days in the wilderness, and they didn't find water. Upon that, it says, metaphorically, water means Torah. As the verse says in Isaiah, everyone that is thirsty, go to water. The prophet Isaiah says, anyone's thirsty? Go to water. Why do we need a prophet for that? Isn't that that's kind of obvious, right? Unless Isaiah is telling us something much deeper. Isaiah is saying, if you're thirsting for meaning, for fulfillment, go to the water, which is Torah. Therefore, the Talmud says, they went 3 days without Torah, and they were exhausted. The prophets therefore enacted that Torah should be read Shabbat, make a break on Sunday, again on Monday, take a break on Tuesday and Wednesday, read again on Thursday, in order that there should never be 3 days without Torah study. So the Talmud asks, this tradition was around long before Ezra, and the Talmud gives an answer that it was around, but Ezra made it more formal and told the people that you have to read 10 verses. I don't want to get into the difference between Moshe and Ezra. In any event, what's important to us is this story of Mara became the precedent for reading Torah a few times a week. Why? Because just like physically a person is unable to go.
30 days without
I
water.
think medically, I think that's pretty much it. Anyone, don't try this at home.
Yeah,
But
yeah, I don't want to try that, yeah.
What is this?
Oh, 3 readings, 3 selections. They do 3 selections on Mondays and Thursdays. So just like physically, a person can't go 3 days without water. So the sages said, wait a minute, there must be more to the story. We can't go 3 days without our spiritual water, and that is Torah. So I once saw a sign on a church down here that says, 7 days without Bible study makes 1 week. And that was on the billboard. So when I saw that, we have it even better. In Jewish tradition, 3 days go by without Torah study, and it doesn't make a week literally, but it makes 1 week. So that's interesting. Yeah, question.
Yeah, so non-Jews are not obligated to study Torah. However, wouldn't one think that if they can't go 3 days without drinking water, they can't go 3 days without some kind of spiritual nurture?
So the portions of the Torah that have specific instructions to Jews don't have to be studied by non-Jews, but the universal values and beliefs in the Torah are relevant for everyone. So a lot of the discussions we have, so even within Jewish, like in Jewish law, it discusses different components of Torah. The halacha, legal stuff, is not relevant for a non-Jew to study because they're not commanded in those particular laws. But things that have to do with ethics and beliefs especially. And a lot of the discussions we have, the lessons, those are relevant for non-Jews as well. So
they should be studying the 5 books.
They need to be getting their inspiration, however. I mean, this particular business about every 3 days is specifically written to Jews, but it can be applied in whatever way is meaningful for a non-Jew, So the lessons of Torah are relevant. The application, though, there's a lot of wiggle room for a non-Jew as to how to best apply that idea in a way that works for them. Okay. Now, let's read one step deeper. The Maggid of Mezrich, who was the second Hasidic Rebbe, goes back to the story of Mara, and he says you missed one key point in the story.
Because they were bitter.
The verse says they came to Mara because they could not drink the water from Mara because it was bitter. That's the way it was translated at the top of the page. However, in the Hebrew, I'll go to the Hebrew for a moment. V'lo yachlu lishtot mayim, they were unable to drink the mayim, the water from Mara, from bitter. Ki marim heim, for they were bitter. Now, literally, it still is referring to the water, okay? Mm-hmm. The Maggid says that there is a deeper meaning as well. Who is they were bitter?
The Jews were bitter.
The Jews were bitter, okay? And you ever try drinking orange juice after you brush your teeth?
Oh, yeah, that's it. You need a break.
Anyone know? If you haven't done it, that's your homework from today's class science experiment. It tastes really awful, right? Why? The orange juice tasted good yesterday and good the next day, but following toothpaste, things taste differently. And that is true often in life. There's a folk tale about a farmer who is I don't know, hoeing his field, and some traveler's walking by, and he says, "Hey, are you from this parts of town?" He says, "No, I'm not. I'm actually looking for a new place to settle. I'm from a few towns over. Tell me, what are the people like in this area?" And he says, "Well, tell me what the people were like in the town that you came from." "They were the nicest folk that I ever met, always doing favors for one another." He goes, "Don't worry, you'll find the people here to be the same." A little bit later, someone comes down, same story. He asks him, "What are you doing here?" "I'm looking to resettle." "What were the people like?" "They were selfish. They were always jealous of everything I had." "What are the people here like?" "You're going to find them to be the same thing." That was the story. Because that often is so. That often is so. When we are bitter, then everything tastes bitter. And the Jews were kvetchy at this period of time, and therefore the water tasted bitter. Now, I'm not saying that the water was not also objectively bitter. It was, okay? I don't mean to say the water in this story was also objectively bitter, but the Maggid gives us a deeper insight. What made it at that time bitter, and again, especially according to this Midrash, that writes that the water used to be sweet, and then it became bitter right when they came. What lousy timing? No, it wasn't lousy timing. They were bitter at that time, and therefore it tasted bitter. And now we can sort of understand a little bit better why this story became the precedent in Jewish tradition for reading the Torah every 3 days, right? I never understood that. I always knew the tradition. You have to read the Torah every 3 days. Why? Because just like physically you can't go without water, so too spiritually you can't go without water. And that was as far as I got. Now I'm seeing a new insight. No. What Torah study is supposed to do to us, and I think this class would be a good example, especially in the middle of the day, not at the end of the day, middle of the workday. Torah is supposed to help us, just like on the internet, you have a refresh button. You're supposed to be able to get a clearer less bitter perspective on life. When you're being schlepped into arguments, schlepped into annoyances, schlepped into petty fights, schlepped into whatever happens. A Panthers lost. No, they won. But, schlepped into whatever it is, you get that fresh perspective, and then things can become sweet again. That's what Torah has the ability to do. So someone ever asked, what's the goal? There are many goals of Torah study, but one of them is to clear up our lenses. The same way when your glasses get cloudy and then they need to be cleared, Torah is supposed to do that. And then you're able to face the world again. And now, let's go back to what Moshe did. Moshe, again, took the piece of wood and threw it in the water, and it became sweet. And I told you, it uses a very odd word for a piece of wood. What's the word it uses? A tree, eitz. So the same, again, this is not literal, but the Hasidic spin on that is, hey, there's another verse in the Bible as well. Eitz chayim hi lamachazikim ba. The Torah is a tree of life for all those who hold on to it. That's a famous line. Many people sing it, temple at synagogue. So what does it mean Moshe threw the tree in? He gave them a little bit of a tree of life. And that is why if you go to the end of the story, so he cried out to the Lord instructed him concerning a piece of wood. He cast it into the water. It became sweet. How does it continue? There he gave them a statute and an ordinance. He gave them, you see the verse? Mm-hmm. He gave them chok umishpat. Moshe taught them Torah there. And I asked earlier, was there where else did the Jews get Torah before the giving of the Torah? At Mara. There was a certain selection of mitzvot that were given to them at Mara. The oral tradition explains what those were. I don't think it's relevant for the class here. But even in the verse itself, it says, after this whole episode, he gave them a statute and an ordinance. He gave them teachings. Fitting very well with this Hasidic message that they were in a kvetchy mood, they were in a bitter mood, and Moshe says, wait a minute, guys. First, you just saw a miracle 3 days ago. I guess you're already running out of fuel. Everything is tasting bitter to you. Now it's time to drink some Torah.
After that miracle, I'd be motivated for a long time.
I know.
I gotta say.
They were slave people, though. They were slave people. Some questions, comments. Yeah, Judy.
Yeah, and there he tested them.
God
tested them the way a teacher tests the recipient of the knowledge, or did he do something else to test them?
Well, he didn't give them water. That's a pretty strong test to see their level of faith, right? So God tested them in that they didn't have water. Obviously, we have the idea of tests found throughout the Torah. God tests Abraham. There's a verse later in Deuteronomy that says God will test you in order to know whether or not you love him or not. And the meaning of that is not that God needs to know.
It's that you need
we need to know. And what a test does is it brings out deeper levels of our psyche and faith that we would not have been able to access if not for that test. So that's the advantage of a test. We had a class on this just a few months ago. However, we also mentioned in that class, we pray to God every day, do not test me. So we don't want it, but when it comes, the goal is to bring out the reservoirs of traits that would not have come out otherwise. Okay, so this is sort of part one. Why does Torah give us this fresh perspective? Because Torah is painting a picture of the world the way it's supposed to look. We get a cloudy vision based upon experiences. Why don't we, Judy, read the next text, top of the page. God
looked into the Torah and he created the world. And when mankind studies the Torah, he maintains the world.
This is from the Zohar. It's a famous text from the Zohar. We've discussed it on different occasions. The meaning here is the Torah is creating a blueprint for the way the world's supposed to look. Sometimes it doesn't end up looking that way. It's almost like when you go to the doctor and they put the two x-rays. One is the way it looks in a healthy person, and here's how it looks in you, right? So sometimes we need that in our life, and Torah gives us this fresh perspective, the refresh button. This is the way it's supposed to look, and then you leave, you feel a little bit uplifted. It's not even that it addressed the particular issue that you were dealing with, but rather it brought you to a level where that now is petty, or that no longer is important anywhere. And there's another beautiful Hasidic saying that says, wherever a person's mind is, that is where he or she lives. In Hebrew, b'machshavto shel adam. In a person's mind, that's where they live. We live in our minds.
And that's why if we're thinking something negative over and over again, it becomes you. And if you're thinking positively, it becomes
And the question then is, how do you get out of it? And there are different ways. What I'm saying in today's class is not the only way. Often the best way is to get out there and do something, help someone else. Just get out of your own little world and go volunteer, go help someone. That's one way. But what we're discussing today that's Torah. Torah study, lunch and learn, another class. I think when you drive, it's a great time. I know when I drive, sometimes I listen to Torah classes, and often I'll just put on, whatever on the radio, or especially like talk radio. When I get to my destination, the difference in the way I feel if I just listen to an uplifting Torah class or some talk radio is so different. Right. And yet, though, it's that much easier to gravitate towards. You don't want to have to suspend your mind right now to think about anything. You just want to be easily entertained. So, obviously music is good also, but I often hear, news or this or that or talk radio, and just people.
Within 5 minutes.
But you just feel, you feel icky afterwards. And Torah makes you feel great afterwards. So that is, we live where our mind is. And this relates to another teaching in Torah. And there's a few different examples of this throughout the Torah. I've mentioned this before. When Joseph is thrown into the pit, it says the pit was empty. There was no water into it. That's what the verse says when Joseph is thrown into the pit. The pit was empty. There was no water into it. Yeah?
I can't remember, were there scorpions?
Oh. So Rashi, quoting the Midrash, why don't you read the next thing, from the implication?
From the implication that the pit was empty, do I not know that no water was in it? It says this to imply that there was no water in it, but there were snakes and scorpions in it.
So the way the Midrash sees it is, the verse is saying it was empty, i.e. of water, but it was full with something else. It shouldn't have said water in the verse. It should just say, if the goal of the verse was just to teach us that the pit was empty, say it was empty. Why does it say empty of water? To imply that there was something else there, i.e. snakes and scorpions. The Midrash, however, gives an interesting, the Rebbe, excuse me, not the Midrash. That's the Midrash. The Rebbe gives an interesting spin on it. How do you get from A to B? The verse just says it was empty of water. Now the Midrash is saying it's filled of snakes and scorpions. Where did that come from? Hal, read this next teaching. The pit.
The pit is the symbol for the mind, and one's mind is never actually empty. Even when we think we are thinking nothing, we are always thinking something.
Except when Hal is, unless you're being guided by Hal's meditation class, that he can allow you to think of nothing. But for the regular folks amongst us, myself included, that's not possible.
And so we are taught that the pit had no water. Water represents Torah, coming from the word Hora, which means direction. When a mind is filled with water, a life-giving source that nourishes, hydrates, and directs us to develop and grow, then the mind is in a safe and healthy place. When there is no water, however, the mind will still be filled with something, for it can never be empty. And in the place of water will enter the snakes and scorpions.
So in the place of water, snakes and scorpions will enter. So what the Rebbe is saying here is, the verse is saying you can't be neutral here. Either you're full of productivity, you're full of good stuff, or it's so easy for the snakes and scorpions to creep in, because a mind can't be empty. So similarly in a life, when we feel ourselves being drawn into negativity, this teaching is saying, how do you get out of your mara-ness? Throw the eights, throw the wood in, the tree of life. Throw the Torah in, and that will help clear our minds. And that's lesson one here. When we feel ourselves being bitter, remember the story of Mara. Maybe it's been too long since our last Torah class. We need to hit the refresh button. This is a beautiful memory I saw from someone. This is a rabbi I know who recently passed away, and his child says that when my father would bless us at the beginning of the year with a traditional Shana Tova Metuka, you should have a sweet year, he would then add this explanation. Do not think that I only mean that the year to come should be sweet. I also mean that the year you've just finished should be sweet. My blessing to you is that you should have the clarity to be able to look back and see how this outgoing year, no matter how it felt at the time, was really sweet all along. Which is a beautiful bracha, that our mind should have that clarity to be able to see things in a positive way. And that helps when we study Torah. So this is part one. Any questions?
Nope.
Okay. So now let's finish. This helps when we know that we are bitter. And then the question is just, how do you get out of it? And one of the advice we mentioned today is we study Torah. But how do you know? How do you know whether it's you or someone else? So one easy way, based upon what we said today, is if everything tastes bitter around you, it's probably because you just brushed your teeth. It's probably that you're filled with that flavor, right? So if it's just one person, like the story where someone didn't drive in many, many decades and finally said, enough, I'm good out there and I'm going to drive today. They get in the car and all of a sudden they get a call from their spouse. And they said, you better watch it. I just listened to the news and it says someone is driving on the wrong side of the road. And the person responds, someone? Everyone is driving on the wrong side of the road. So one indication is if everybody is on the wrong side of the road, then you know you're probably eating something that's bitter, right? But what about when someone does something to you and you're not sure if it's you or somebody else? So we mentioned getting the objective opinion. We mentioned trying to get out of your own shoes and seeing it from their lens. So here's a teaching of the Baal Shem Tov that is worth thinking upon. This is really a separate idea. I wanted to connect it, but it's a separate idea. All right. The Baal Shem Tov writes,
your fellow human being is your mirror. If your own face is clean, the image you perceive will also be flawless. But should you look at your fellow human being and see a blemish, it is your own imperfection that you are encountering. You are being shown what it is that you must correct within yourself. Therefore, it follows that a complete tzaddik, righteous person, does not see any evil in any person.
Now, everyone in the room should immediately jump up and say, that's not that. Is this literal? Come on. If someone scams me and robs me, I'm supposed to say the problem isn't me?
Right.
So obviously the Baal Shem Tov, this cannot be literal. He says here, whatever you see is a mirror. You see negativity, it's teaching you to look inside. You have that same thing. But if someone goes and robs someone, am I supposed to say,
what a good person.
Right. Am I supposed to say, oh, it must be that I robbed what is the meaning of that? Especially because we have a specific text in the Torah that tells us there's a mitzvah to rebuke. In Leviticus, you should rebuke and admonish your fellow person when you encounter him or her behaving wrongfully. That is a mitzvah in the Torah to rebuke. It's not an easy mitzvah.
Wouldn't that get you killed?
You know what? Today's society is far more sensitive, I think, than it used to be. But there's a lot of conditions before you do this. You have it 1 second. Before you say that, hey, my mitzvah in life is going to be going rebuking other people. Yeah. There's a whole checklist of items that you need to do before that I've discussed. We're not going to do now. But clearly, you have to make sure. Okay, in a nutshell, and in a nutshell. Number one, again, is this just me or is this objective? Ask somebody else. Number two, do I have any ulterior motive over here? Meaning, is there something that I stand to gain from this?
All right.
Okay, Number three, is now the best time to do it? Number four, am I the best person to do it? Because the goal of the mitzvah is not that I should be the rebuker. The goal is the person should improve. And often the difference of who does it is huge. So there's more also. So before we get carried away with this mitzvah, there is a mitzvah, however, in the Torah to rebuke when done right. What's important to this conversation is this seems to be at odds with the Baal Shem Tov's teaching. The Baal Shem Tov is telling us that when you see a flaw, you should know
that it's you.
It's supposed to be a mirror. There's a problem with you. The verse in Leviticus says we have a mitzvah to rebuke someone, and if we see something wrong, then we're supposed to do something about it. How do we reconcile between the two? So I love this idea from the Rebbe. Why don't you go, Brian?
If you observe a blemish in another human being and find yourself caught up in that person's problems rather than your own appropriate response to them, you might be struggling with a similar blemish. It is time to take a good look in the mirror and confront your own issues. However, if you encounter a negative quality or a negative behavior in another person and you do not see his negativity per se, and don't find yourself enwrapped in defining how horrible and evil he is, but rather you see his negativity a call to take appropriate action to stop the behavior or to defend yourself and others from it, then you are pure. That person's problem is really not your
This
problem.
is so deep.
Yeah.
When you see something, and that's why earlier, Brian, you said you don't have to be angry about it, just a matter of how can we fix the problem. If that is your response, it's not a mirror. Because you're focused on getting it done. If, however, you are enwrapped the whole day, what a rotten individual this person, so evil, and your whole day is thinking about the evil, not the response to it, the Baal Shem Tov is saying, there's a lesson here for you somehow. Take a hard look inwards. Maybe people around the table here could think of examples, even psychologically, of this. I heard an interesting one when someone was giving a class on it. So take two husbands. So we'll call them Bob and Joe. Okay, Bob and Joe.
How many wives?
They each have one wife, but let's call them both Sarah, okay? Just to keep the discussion simple. And Bob and Joe both love having a lot of guests. They love inviting people to the house. Just they want always people to be there. They love entertaining. The Sarahs in both stories do not. I don't like it. I'm uncomfortable. I just don't like people over here. I feel I'm never doing enough. I feel like I'm not able to, I don't like the pressure, So it's hard for both Bob and Joe. One's response, Bob, what's wrong with Sarah, man? She has such issues over here. Can't you just work it out? Such an insecurity going on inside of her. She should go, get some therapy, find out what's really bothering her. Oh, everything always has to be perfect. And the whole day just really angry at Sarah's insecurities and issues with the inability to have guests. This is a hypothetical. Bob, I wonder, does she need more help at home? Maybe there's something that I have not done enough. And immediately thinking what can be done about the situation, okay? So what's this idea saying? That for the first guy who was, Bob, I think I said, or Joe, I'm confused. But the first guy, it's a mirror, because guess what? He too has that same insecurity. The only difference is, how does he deal with the insecurity? By needing to validate that I don't have it by always having guests. You see? It's a mirror to him that in some way he suffers from the same thing. He just deals with it differently. The second person who's focused on action doesn't have that same flaw. This is just one example. I'm sure there are other examples. If we had a psychologist here, they would be able to share it. But what the Rebbe is saying here is when a person is wrapped in the negativity of someone or something, it doesn't mean they have the same thing, but there's something inside of them that has that as well, and that's why they're so bothered by it.
And that's what they call gaslighting, where you take and project, like you're fighting with your spouse, and, well, you did that,
Right.
That's the same.
Versus this objectivity where, how can I improve the situation, focus on action? Then that's the mitzvah in Vayikra in Leviticus 19:17. And so here I start off today, how do you know when it's you or someone else? Are you really, what is dwelling in your mind? The proper response, how to turn this into something positive, or the evil of the person and how annoying. If the whole day that's sitting on you, something may not be right. Again, this is a generalization. I don't mean to say this can be applied across the board. There are plenty of times where someone is legitimately abusing someone and they're still filled inside of them with the hurt and the anger. Granted. So I say this last teaching with a grain of salt. It's a generalization, and it's a good way for ourselves to know when it is objective and when it is me. Yes.
I have a funny story I'd
Sure.
like to relate. I'm not sure if I'm on the right page with
No.
However, my husband had a very very, very loud voice. He was quite bombastic. And we were at his grandmother's house, and she was a darling little old, very holy person. And he was going on about something, and the kids, it was quite noisy. And she said, "Thank the God I'm not deaf." It was so beautiful. Right. And it was appropriate, and it was very effective.
Beautiful. Anyone else have any just reflections on this idea? Again, just to summarize two points here. And the first is we have the story of Marah. Why did the water taste bitter? Because they were bitter, according to the Maggid of Mezrich. That is why this became the precedent for study of Torah. Torah has the ability to uplift us, to dig us out of schmutz and out of the pit, so to speak, into a better place, into a clearer place, that afterwards we can have the proper perspective. The goal of the Torah study is not that it should be a little bubble, but rather that afterwards we can re-engage in the world and be able to think with a fresher perspective. And the last 10 minutes we discussed the second idea, how there is a difference, whether or not we're focused on action and what can be done about the situation versus the anger. And sometimes if it's too much of the latter, that's a sign that really you are bitter about something that needs help. Yeah, Hal?
Well, I think you can take it one step further, like Jackie is upset about the Flint water situation. But what have I done to the environment? Not as bad as Flint, I'm not, but have I done anything today that is a microcosm of what they did big, and why am I doing that? And so just turn the mirror to you see someone stealing, what have I stolen today? Could be time. And I think, since I'm not a Sadiq, I could find something in everything.
Correct.
And not to beat up on myself.
Right.
That's the question, Hal, in my mind, that's the question of all that. I mean, I think it's very useful, and I agree with that, but the question is, how do you avoid that from becoming just relentless self-criticism when it's too much?
Right, that's right, and then you won't do anything. So,
Right.
yeah.
Which you can also criticize yourself for, by the way.
And sometimes, though, it need not be criticism, but it can be what more can I do? It could be like learning. It need not be beating up what I do wrong, but how can I make the situation better?
I think that's the answer.
Yeah, that's a learning.
Yeah, I think that's it.
Because we are, especially today, bombasted with news and this item and that item and a lot of negativity, and we spend a lot of our time reading about things that we can't do much about. And, to a certain extent we can, and obviously we vote for people and whatnot. But one of the nice things is just hold it. What can I do in my life to make a little bit of a difference when we feel ourselves getting consumed about something? So
even though I know this is a different class.
But let's, for the 1 second, Ann, just for the online community, any questions, comments?
Nope. No questions. No questions. No comments.
All right, thank you. Everyone for joining in. If you have any questions, you can always email us, yc@chabadofcary.org. I'll be happy to respond and hear your perspective, perhaps share it at another class. But thank you so much for joining, and thank you to Amnon for hosting today's program.
Well,
You're tuned to the Nissan Communications Network. Our weekly lineup of call-in programs includes Computers 2K Now with Amnon Nissan, My Life, My Will with Gisela DiCarlo, The Tanya Love Show, Health In with Debbie Bruck, Breaking Free with Marilyn Shannon, Triangle Be Well with Howard Jacobson, Lunch and Learn with Rabbi Yisrael Cutler, Lessons of Vietnam with NCVVI members, Parent Dome with Ryan Miller, Current Affairs with Amnon Nissan. And if you tuned in too late, you can always watch each program in its entirety or download an MP3 audio file of it in the archives section on nissancommunications.com. Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel, follow us on Twitter, and like us on Facebook. Sponsored by Atomos.com, makers of quality video recorders and converters, CarolinaApparel.com, and DeltaForce.net.